I'm so excited that we're all here today. I know that sounds a bit kind of odd to say, but I am excited we're on Zoom. I am excited that we actually have this offering. Welcome to the inaugural offering of a CERA other than the conference session for as long as I've been involved in CERA. So that's pretty exciting to be able to do something. We figured we wanted to be able to reach out and give back to all of our members as we go. And because we've become so well versed in Zoom and have the opportunity to be able to provide some of these resources, we thought we should try something like this. So thanks for signing up. Thanks for being here. And we would love your feedback at the end to be able to see what you think about this process and what we're doing. We really want to build excitement towards the conference as we get closer on in November. So this is just an opportunity to do that. One thing I want to say before I introduce our very special guest who's going to be taking us through some evaluation practices today is we're going to do another one of these in September, and you're going to do an evaluation at the end. We're all some measurement folks here. That's what we do. So hopefully you will take the opportunity to actually complete that survey and give us some ideas about what you would like to see at the beginning or at the just in September, at the beginning of the next school year. Something that could be relevant around the topics of CERA and what we could be able to do. And then we would be able to go out and provide and find someone who'd be willing to offer that up. So without any further ado, I want to introduce Dr. Shannon Coulter, who is a past president of CERA. He is with us from San Diego County Office of Education. We were thinking about what we could do around something that is relevant to everybody in education, regardless of if you're at a research institution, if you're at a university, or if you're in a K-12 setting. And we know evaluating programs is one of those areas that is relevant to us all. It's a sandbox we all play in. And with all of the money and programs that are coming out, especially in the K-12 space, there's lots of programs that could really use the things we're going to talk about today. What is it that actually works well? Why does it work well? And how can we make it better? So this becomes a very relevant question, a really relevant topic to all of us in the room. And there is no one better than Dr. Coulter who can take us through, because that is his job. I will leave his specific introductions and what he does to him, because he has some great experience that he wants to share with you. So beyond that, thank you very much again. And we will look forward to your questions at the end of our session today. Shannon.
Thanks, Corey. Thank you, everybody. I appreciate the opportunity. So again, thanks, Corey, for having me here today. I was hoping to capture a little bit of information about everybody that's on the meeting today. So if you could just take a minute to put your name and your organization and your role into the chat so that we could capture that, that would be wonderful. I always like to know who it is that I'm talking to and have that network of folks that I'm sure most of you have some expertise in this area too that I can learn from. So just briefly about me, as Corey mentioned, I am a past president of CERA. And that was a really wonderful experience for me, just to be able to be on the board and be able to help support the different groups of people, you know, that come to CERA. But prior to that, or during my time at CERA, I've been at the County Office of Ed. I'm there. This is my 11th year, so it's been a few years, a little over a decade now. Most of that time, I've been in my same capacity, working in research and evaluation. Before SDCOE, I worked at 2 universities for some time, and then I spent 8 years in alternative education, so working with at-risk and expelled youth. And that's really where I first sort of dipped my toes into the water and understood on a more practical level how to evaluate things. I coordinated a Title I program where we were evaluating a lot of the services that we were providing to the students where I worked. As I was preparing for this particular presentation, I was looking back over the folders that I create every year for my annual work plan for SDCOE, and I'm currently evaluating my 83rd program in San Diego. So I've had a lot of really rich experiences as evaluator. I currently, and I've had over the years, a number of Department of Defense grants. San Diego, of course, is home to 2 fairly large military bases. And the Department of Defense provides a considerable amount of money for kids as they transition into San Diego schools. And I oversee the grants in Oceanside, which houses most of the children who are connected to our Marines, and then of course in Coronado, where they're mainly connected to the Navy. I've had a number of California Department of Education grants. We currently have 2 literacy grants going on right now. But over the years, I've had an opportunity not only to evaluate grants, but really just to partner with folks across the state at other county offices in higher education. And again, I just find it a really rich and rewarding experience to be able to do this kind of work. And I'm again glad to be here and share a little bit about my experiences today. So I wanted to talk just briefly, because I am going to talk a little bit about really why programs fail. And before I did that, I wanted to talk about one of my favorite programs that I've ever been involved in. It's called Coaching Boys into Men. It's actually a program that really recognizes the influence that a coach has on the lives of his or her players, and how often a coach is, sometimes is a parent or a mentor to young students, and really about how things can happen, especially with young men and in school, that can get them into trouble, things around harassment, things around sexual abuse. And there's not often a lot of conversation in schools or even outside of schools about that topic. And so Coaching Boys into Men is really a program that's meant to do that, where coaches have those conversations, sometimes courageous conversations with young men in an effort to reduce harassment and perhaps sexual violence that goes on in schools. But the reasons that I feel like it's one of the better programs that I've been a part of is because it really touches on the issues that plague programs. It really addresses those issues up front. And I would say the number one reason that I always find where programs don't succeed is just around communication. As an evaluator, it's so often my experience that I go out and I talk to people about a program that exists in their school district. And oftentimes their understanding of that program can be very limited. Sometimes people have no idea what program it is that I'm talking about. Other times people are very knowledgeable about it because they wrote the grant for the program or they designed some of the professional development for it. But communication about it to the different stakeholder groups, this is often a reason why I find, programs are not successful. Coaching Boys into Men, you can sort of see on this slide across the bottom, there's a kit for coaches, there's a kit for advocates, there's a promo kit, there's a clinic kit, there's all kinds of ways that this program is communicating to the different stakeholders. And it just does a wonderful job of doing that. Another thing that it really does super well is that it lays out all the concrete steps on, how to enact the program, from beginning to end and all the milestones in between. This is often something, again, that when I go into a program, it can be quite difficult to discern how a program works. Often the program's put together by various different people, and it doesn't necessarily come together very sequentially. And so sometimes it's hard for me as the evaluator just to be able to piece together the different core components of a program and how it's supposed to work. And if teachers are enacting a curriculum, like how that's supposed to work, those things can be challenging for me to figure out. And sometimes, again, when I talk to folks about how this program works, it can be quite confusing, to listen to them because they're not super clear on how it works. Again, Coaching Boys to Men, it's a simple program, but around a very important topic. But again, it gets the simple things right. And like good programs do that. They do get the simple things right. They get the details right. And the final thing that, again, that what makes it a really like important program for me and a good experience that I've had in it is that it shows you the impact that this program has on the lives of coaches and on the lives of young men. If you're ever trying to get somebody to adopt something, you're ever trying to get somebody to change their behavior, one of the most important pieces is to give them examples of what will happen when you change your behavior. Otherwise, you'll find it hard for people to adopt a behavior. Most people aren't going to adopt it just because you tell them to adopt it. They need to actually see what kind of difference it's going to make. And again, Coaching Boys into Men does a great job of that. You can click on the impact link. There's so many anecdotal experiences that coaches will share. There are videos from students, student athletes, and sort of their experience in the program. And so all of these things are really packaged up in a way that allow this program to be very successful. And again, it's just my experience that a lot of programs, they don't have these enabling conditions. They don't have this kind of environment that they're put in. And I always say it doesn't really matter how high quality the program is. If it's not put into an environment that's going to accept it, then it's not going to thrive. It's probably going to die out. So I wanted to share this piece about Coaching Boys into Men with you because, again, I feel like most of the conversation I'm going to talk about today is going to be about some of those reasons why programs fail. This is a great one. But I'm also going to give you some strategies around some of these reasons that I think are helpful for any evaluator. If you are an evaluator, they certainly can be added to your toolkit if they're not already there. But if you direct programs or manage projects, if you're more on that side of programs, then a lot of these things would be things that you should expect from your evaluator. You should expect your evaluator to help support you with the communication piece, with developing how the program works and with curating some of the evidence of its impact. So any brave souls out there, been a part of a program that you felt like just never lived up to its expectations and you want to share it with us?
I'll share on behalf of our group. We all had very similar experiences where something gets started by a select group of people, whether it's site-based or district-based, and the vision is not fully communicated for one reason or another. And that lack of why, that lack of vision, that lack of follow through became a barrier to implementation because folks typically saw it as another thing, as opposed to something that's going to be part of the system to support students. And it was interesting while we all had, different experiences. And some of those experiences really didn't have a name or an exact context. The theme was this lack of that became then a barrier and ultimately, hurt the program.
Thank you for sharing that, Jessica. I mean, I feel like, yes, you've pretty much hit the nail on the head with this presentation too, because a lot of the things that I'm going to talk about are those reasons for failure, just not having, not communicating the purpose, for a program, and then definitely the lack of implementation that occurs with programs. Anyone else want to share?
I think this graph is very interesting because of that 5-year, because I think one of the things that it all kind of ties together, that as a program is implemented, it also will evolve over its implementation as it's getting refined. And if the why behind isn't going with the implementation and the evolving of it, then sometimes it turns into something different than its original intent. And then you have the personnel turnover. So it's that almost like telephone game. As the original implementers try to pass on, if they're moving on elsewhere, the whole message doesn't necessarily get passed on.
If I can piggyback on that.
Absolutely.
today is my jaded day, so just so you're aware. I have yet to see a program that has been attempted to train those that are going to deliver the information whose intent is truly to benefit the students and bring success to every single one of us. I've yet to see one work because I don't see that anyone sticks to that 5 years. Apathy starts, people start doubting, and money is moved into other areas before we've even felt that we can put down the book and make the program work for our specific group of kids. And if you hold on to it, to the program, as though it were sterile, pure, and perfection, that doesn't exist. But because the money's gone elsewhere, we never really got the whole program to begin with. It had no chance to survive. And one gentleman said in my group that when you get a group of people who have support throughout the beginning of implementation, the training, until you're independent, that is what he's seen that has made a difference, is when a group of people are given sufficient human support, guidance. And thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I mean, I sort of, we've probably all had this experience before too. Somebody has written a grant, and like the grant funders, whoever's funding the grant, will structure the years of the grant in a way where they'll say like, well, the first year is the planning year, year 2, 3 is like the implementation year. And then you're sort of have a more mature program after that. And you can keep going as if like the implementation piece, it's one and done, you know, just sort of, you can finish it at that point and then just move on to start collecting outcomes, which we all know is not the case. I mean, in order to keep a program from dying on you, like you are constantly focused on implementation throughout the entire life of the grant. It's never really over. So all those pieces really that were just shared right now really resonate with my experience. Yeah, I mean, programs have a hard time of surviving. You know, about half of them after a few years, 5 years, are going to die out. And there's no sort of magic bullet to that. There's a lot of reasons why programs fail to survive. Some of them, as were mentioned here, are political. Others because leadership changes and like we're moving on to a different kind of program. Some because outcomes are not being achieved. There's a lot of reasons, but along with this university research on program failure, there's also some reasons why most programs do fail. And again, this really resonates with my experience because very few of the programs that I've ever been involved in fail because of these technical reasons. I've only had a few of my evaluations fail because there wasn't enough money, you know, in the program anymore to do the work, or there wasn't enough time for the work to get done. Those sort of technical reasons, while they do cause program failure, are more rare than some of these other reasons at the top, and namely the piece about poor communication. Just really not having any kind of communication strategy is often a big reason. People spend a lot of time building a program and creating a program, but then they sort of fail to message its purpose, and they fail to think about all the different types of people who actually need to know about the program and the way that you would message to them. Insufficient leadership, politics, of course, are a big reason. And then again, the other two, there are, you know, just like the purpose of the change, you know, why is it that I'm being asked to change? I think that's an excellent question that any teacher who's being asked to adopt a program should ask. You know, what is the purpose of this change? Why am I being asked to change from my current practice to something else? And if there's not evidence there that the change that you're asking me to make isn't going to benefit my kids more than what I currently do, well, there should be a conversation around those types of things. And as I mentioned before with the Coaching Boys into Men example, it does a really great job of curating the evidence of that impact so that you have that up front when you're trying to get buy-in to the program. If you already can show people like this is the difference this program will make, you're far more likely to get the kind of behavior change that you expect in programs. I use that term behavior change. I'll continue to use it a lot. And some of you may agree with that term, some of you may not, but in my opinion, like it doesn't matter what I'm trying to do, whether it's trying to get teachers to use certain literacy practices, whether it's getting greater access into, STEM kind of elective courses, whether it's getting teachers and students to talk more in mathematics classrooms. Like these are all behaviors that you're trying to get out of people. And to me, that's at the core of every program, is trying to get people to behave in a way that they're not currently behaving. So these are the big problems that we're going to go through today, and I'm going to take you sort of through that problem, and then I'm going to take you through like how I think evaluation can help. And this number one is fairly key. We've talked about it a little bit already. Just the fact that there are communication breakdowns often occur with programs, and it leads to uncertainty and division. And those things make people either just not think the program is valuable and they're not going to implement it as the way they should. Or in some cases, it leads to resistors, people who just absolutely refuse to do the program. The second one being implementation. The fact that the program's actions and strategies were really, there was never any buy-in. Frontline staff really lose faith in the efficacy of the program very quickly. There's never really any implementation work that's being done on the program. And again, that often leads to issues when we're trying to evaluate programs. And then finally, just this behavioral change piece. A lot of times, I go back to like my 7th grade algebra teacher. I think of him, think about the way that he taught algebra. It's like, I'm going to show you how to solve the problem on the board, and you should be able to follow that example. And that's certainly important, for me to be able to see you demonstrate what it is. But you also have to engage people on another level. You can't just sort of engage them cognitively when you're trying to get them to change their behavior. You do need to engage them on an emotional level as well. Because a lot of the things that we're asking people to do are things that, they have done a certain way for a really long time. Just demonstrating to them another way to do it is often not enough to get that kind of change in them. So let's jump into this poor communication piece quickly here, because I feel like there are always sort of situations that I experience when we have problems with communication. The first one is around this idea that too few people actually know about the project. It's common for me to really go out to districts and talk to the people who've developed the project or the program, and they're super knowledgeable about how it works. They know timelines, they know, budget kinds of pieces. They know everything there is to know about the program. But then you often talk to some of the frontline staff, the people who are responsible for actually enacting the program, and some of them have a lot of varied understanding about, how this program works, sort of what its theory of action is. Some of them may know what the outcomes of the project are, some of them may not. And again, that is created. That gets created because there's a lot of effort and energy that goes into building out the program and less going into communicating about it, to other people. Sometimes you might get some purpose statement when you're in a professional development meeting where somebody is telling you, you know, this is a part of a project that, you know, we've written this grant, and it's going to improve literacy, but they still don't really understand how this one PD really fits into the bigger picture. The second piece that's that situation that I often encounter is this example of the left hand doesn't really know what the right hand's doing. You know, programs, they often have a lot of different parts. I've worked with programs that have consultants that have taught, that have provided professional development in a grant. Often I am a person who's brought into a grant as an evaluator. And so you have all of these different moving parts that are happening. And sometimes these folks don't really understand the roles of each other. And they don't often understand how my role fits in with the other roles of people that are working on the grant. I often use the analogy of, like, I could go out and get a bunch of the best parts of different cars. I could get a transmission from a Mercedes and an electrical system of a BMW, the fuel system of a Honda, and I could put all these things together, but I may not actually have a car. So all of these different moving parts and pieces, it's not really about getting the best pieces in place. It's often about how we integrate these different pieces so that they're coherent. The last example that I often find is people with programs that I'm involved in. Leadership sometimes has the autonomy to do certain things in terms of you know, if the program, for example, called for teachers being involved in professional development, getting resources, and then from that professional development, they were going to be using small group instruction in the classroom. And so sometimes it's been my experience that school leaders would message out the fact that you're going to be getting this professional development, you're going to be getting these resources. Then teachers ask around, what's the expectation? Like, how often should we be using, you know, these strategies? And those might be very inconsistent across leaders in a school district. Some of them may not be requiring them to use it. Others might say, well, it says to use it 30 minutes every day, so I sort of expect you to use it 30 minutes every day. And this often leads to a lot of confusion, you know, with the frontline staff who are trying to enact the program when they're getting these mixed messages from their leaders. So these are all sort of the major situations that I encounter in programs that I've noticed really lead to problems. And so I've gone out and spent a lot of time to try to work on what are some ways that we can mitigate these problems. The first thing that I think is just critical is the step of actually mapping out all the different audiences that need to be communicated to. I typically do this in a little bit more of like a steering committee fashion, where we try to bring in a representative group of the community. That might be school leaders, it might be teachers, it might be community members, it might be parents, it might be students, but we're really trying to get a diverse group of people together so that we can figure out, again, like who are the audiences that are representative of the broader community, and how do we help gather their perspectives? So I've sort of put them in certain buckets, and I think there are 4 different kinds of people, one being decision makers. So these are folks who know the program directly. They're making decisions for the program. Some of them are budgetary decisions. Some of these folks are board members. They are really strong advocates for the literacy program in the district, and they are responsible for making decisions about them. So, you know, the people on the steering committee are those people in, you know, in the broader community. We have to figure out, again, who are these people and sort of what's their attitude toward the program. Decision makers can be very helpful especially when they have a position of authority and they can make things happen for you. But decision makers can, make decisions that really adversely affect your program as well. I've certainly been involved in programs where, the project director has been moved to a different role 3 years into the program. And it really hurt the program greatly because of that decision. However, had we communicated with that person better throughout the life cycle of the program and figured out like what his or her attitude was toward this person, toward this project director, maybe we wouldn't have found ourselves in that situation. Another person that's another sort of representative group that's really important are people who collaborate with your project. These again are individuals who they often have a stake in the program. These can be these are definitely people who are supportive of it. These can at times be like evaluators. They may be collaborating with you. Oftentimes there are consultant groups that you're working with to provide professional development. I had an Arts for Learning grant in San Diego where they actually put teaching artists in the classroom with elementary school teachers. And so these folks had to collaborate together in order to build lessons for kids. And again, you want to figure out who these folks are, who are the people who collaborate with the program, and then what's their attitude toward the program and the program leaders. The two other groups that I find are really important, again, allies of the program and resistors of the program. Resistors are people, who distrust the program for some reason or another. Especially in sort of the political climate that we find ourselves in today, there are a lot of people who have become very distrustful of programs that we've had in existence, for many years. Now all of a sudden there's something about them that they don't like, and they're actually communicating that, in different ways. I have a grant where just this past week, there were 2 editorials in the newspaper about the grant where 2 people that I would sort of put into the category of resistors were very, very critical about, what the grant was trying to accomplish. And again, that could be read by a lot of people and can really create a lot of issues within the grant. And even though we're doing active things to address some of these issues before they get into the newspaper, it's still a real problem, that we face in our programs, and it's a real reason why these programs can fail. So the solution here for me, one of the ways that you can actually mitigate these problems with communication is like, you need to figure out who the target audiences are that you need to communicate to, but you also need to speak to their interests. It's great to message something to people if certain folks really are motivated by the saving costs kind of messaging, because they want to know that this program is costing less than another program. There are folks out there that's sort of their bent in the world. And so you want to message to them, but you want to message in a way that speaks to their interests. There's often sort of this gaining recognition kind of group that you can speak to as well. I mean, these are folks who want to be able to say, this is the only math program like this in the county. And so that's an interest of some people. And so being able to figure out who that audience is and figure out what motivates them and then message something to them in that way, again, it's just building a certain amount of trust between you and the audience of the grant. And so, yeah, some people just want to keep the community, happy. They don't want things disrupting, sort of the broader community, because they know those things might have an impact on what's going on in schools. And so there's a lot of people for whom that message will resonate, like, how is it that this is, bridging relationships between people. It's fostering good relationships. It's not actually, disrupting things. And then oftentimes, there are people who are on the positive side and can be motivated by this kind of messaging, but then there are people who are going to have concerns and doubts about the program. And so what are those? What are those concerns? What are those doubts? And how can we start to message those things up front? Again, when you're trying to message these things after the negative things have happened, it's so much harder to have that trust with people. The more we can proactively do these things before even a program rolls out, the better we are to get off to like to have like a good takeoff, with the program. I guess that's the way it needs to be put. Anytime there's like a shaky takeoff with programs, I'm always concerned about whether or not they're going to achieve their outcomes. When we have like a smooth takeoff, when we've identified our audiences that we want to address and we've thought about the messaging to them and we've addressed most of the concerns in the program and we've gotten off to, we've taken off smoothly, I feel like we're in a good place to now start, pivoting to some of the more important things like implementation. If we haven't done those things, we're sort of mired back in that same cycle of doing those things before we can actually start focusing on implementation, because all of these problems, they just sort of roll over into the implementation world. So what is it that your audience needs to know to act more effectively? And again, what do you want them to do with that information? Those are the pieces that I feel like really help mitigate the problems with communication. So let me pivot over to the implementation side of the world and the lack of follow through, because I feel like that is another major issue that plagues the success of programs when things are not being implemented well and when there's just really no follow through. Often in evaluation world, there's sort of like the evaluation trifecta, the three things that you need to know about any program. I mean, you obviously need to know its goals or objectives, what it's trying to accomplish. You need to know the strategies or activities that the program uses to accomplish those goals and objectives. And you need to know what is it that I would need to know that this program is on track to accomplish those goals or objectives. Those are the three like essential things that I try to figure out right away. But within that second part, what are the strategies and activities? There's a whole nother layer of things going on there. And that's really implementation. Every program comes with a set of hopefully evidence-based strategies or activities that are going to yield certain outcomes. And I personally, I work on maybe 1% of my projects involve looking at sort of the impact of a strategy from the standpoint that it's never been used before. Almost all of my work programs have adopted an evidence-based strategy, one that's already, there's already a lot of research behind that we know has an impact on student achievement. And so most of the goals that I have with evaluation work, they're very rarely on trying to determine like the causal impact of this particular strategy. It's like that's already been determined. We need to figure out which of these have the biggest impact and how we just implement them well. So that's one of the reasons, again, that I focus a lot of my work on implementation and just being able to think about implementation through this lens of like, what's your program story? I often always ask all my grants as we're getting involved with them, I ask them the question is like, well, what at the end of this, at the end of 3, 4, 5 years, what's the story that you want to be able to tell about this program? Who are the characters that you want to be able to tell that story? It's really important to get them primed to envision that part because that story is going to dictate really like how I evaluate things and the people I gather evidence from. All those kinds of pieces are really important. And what I've sort of learned over time is like there's basically three major stories that people want to be able to tell. The first kind of story is like, it's a causal story. It's connecting all the dots kind of story. It's one where we accomplished all our goals in the grant, and we know that our program strategies caused the changes which resulted in meeting those goals. That is like an impact story. That's a causal story that a lot of people want to be able to tell. And in my experience, if you are able to tell that story, if you're able to say, hey, we met all of our goals, and we know that the strategies that we used caused those changes, then you've done a tremendous amount of work on implementation in order to get there. I mean, I've just never been a part of a project where the implementation has been lackluster and we accomplished all the goals of the program. And so that's a story that a lot of people want to be able to tell. That's a difficult story to tell in a lot of the work that we do, because it's difficult to make causal statements about programs, especially not being able to randomly assign kids to interventions and things of that nature. So that can be a challenging story, but people want to be able to tell it. If you can't tell that story, I tell them, well, can you tell this story, which is we accomplished our goals. We're not certain if it was a result of what we did in the grant because we're doing a number of other things. So you sort of have this story that says like, we accomplished what we wanted to, and it happened at a time where we were doing certain things that we intended to do. And so that in and of itself is not a causal story. But whenever you sort of embed a lot of really high quality implementation work with this, it really raises the degree of confidence that people have that this program that achieved its goals because of the things that were done in it, because of the strategies that were used, because of the activities. Most of my work sort of lives in these two boxes over here. Mainly, I try to get a lot of my grants in this middle box, because if we can complement the work that goes on in a grant with high quality implementation and we achieve our goals, that's a fairly powerful story to be able to tell. And that's what I really want to be able to work on people to be able to tell. But in order to do that, you really have to focus on like solid implementation work. The third kind of story is what I call the Hurricane Katrina story. And no, obviously no offense to anyone that's sort of lived through Hurricane Katrina, but this is the story of like, we didn't accomplish our goals because our program is so complex and I'm really not sure what went wrong. You know, so this is that we had a bad outcome and it was sort of an act of nature, you know, story. This is a horrible story to end up with, right? I mean, this is a story where nobody takes responsibility for what went wrong in the program. And it is a very common story in my experience that nobody wants to really point a finger or say anything about why this program did not meet its outcomes. And again, even if we don't achieve our outcomes and we have really high quality implementation, then at least the Hurricane Katrina story becomes a story of we didn't achieve our goals, but we know it's because these four things weren't really done well during implementation. We just never got them right. If I can tell that story, I still have a bit of like, first of all, we're taking responsibility for what went wrong in the program, and hopefully we don't make those mistakes in the future. But secondly, you do have a little bit, I'm using the word loosely here, a little bit of a causal link. We can point to things that happened in the past and say it's probably for some of these reasons that we didn't actually achieve our goals. And that's the kind of story that I'm always trying to shift over to focusing on the outcome story. I'm always trying to get it away from like, let's take no responsibility for it, and let's take responsibility for it. But the only way we can do that is implement well. And implementation is tough. it's not a sexy thing, you know, whenever you're running a program, you know, to, you know, actually count how many times things are done, and you know, pieces of evidence like that can seem very compliancy. And I know that that's a lot of the reasons why people don't do it, is because it does feel like that. It does often feel like compliance. And I don't want to be in a world of compliance. I want to live in a world of efficacy. But it's very hard to live in a world of efficacy if you don't have compliance to the program. So I've worked for about 12 years now with NERN, which is an organization out of North Carolina. If you're an evaluator, you probably know about some of the work of NERN. They produce a lot of implementation tools. This is one of them, the Implementation Stages Planning Toolkit. I find it to be a pretty helpful document when it comes to just sort of a prescription for how implementation can be done. And I embed it in every evaluation that I conduct. So NERN has literally hundreds of tools that can be used to help you with implementation. But this is probably the main tool I use, and it's actually a part of my process. My evaluative process is going through this tool. So this is just a generic template that I've created, but it comes directly from that document. So this is all NERN's work. None of it's my work. I just find it like it's actually a really good flow of things. It works perfectly for evaluation work. You know, is there a team of people who's responsible for implementation? That's the first thing. You know, do you have a group of people that's going to focus on that part? I try to ensure that that's a part of every grant that I'm involved in. Have people really identified the changes that need to be made? You know, have they done that kind of work, that kind of needs assessment work? Do they know why these changes are needed? Have they already assessed what's in place to address the change? I mean, it's rare in my experience that school districts don't already have something going on to address the problems that programs are meant to address. They often have multiple things going on, right? We're adding something new in here oftentimes with this new program. How does it fit in, you know, with all of those things? How do we make it coherent? So, you know, have they identified those different things that are in place to address the problem? Do they know what practice or program or strategy that they're going to be using? And I try to push in here a lot of the evidence-based changes coming from different you know, research organizations, whether it's the What Works Clearinghouse or other ones that I use. I try to get them to really figure out, you know, well, if you're going to use a strategy, let's see the evidence behind it so that we know what impact it's already supposed to have. Developing a communication plan around the change process. That's that fifth step. Again, we've already gone over that in like the first part of this presentation, but that's really critical in order for implementation to happen. How well defined is the practice or program? Too often, when I evaluated a program that was getting small group instruction into early education classrooms, TK and K classrooms around reading, and that the practice that they want teachers to be engaged in involved a lot of steps and was quite complicated, but it wasn't really laid out for them anyway. It wasn't very clearly defined. And so again, when it's not super clearly defined, teachers are going to go in and they're going to do the best they can possibly do with what they know, but you're going to end up with a lot of variability in implementation because of that, because it's not clearly defined. And I realize that like not a lot of people who are building literacy programs want to phrase things in like step 1, do this, step 2, do that, step 3, do this. I realize like we're not looking for something that prescriptive, but just like what are the core components? What are the things that I should always see in a small literacy group? Should it only be 5 to 6 kids, you know, reading? Should I see the teacher previewing the vocabulary? what are those core things that should always be there, and having people clearly define what those are. Having regular implementation team meetings. And then these pieces start to get into like, who is it that's going to be using? We got to select our participants. We've got to provide professional development. We have to provide coaching. We can't just show them how to do it. We have to wrap the coaching around it so that there's a system there for them to continue to develop in their practice. What's the data system that we're going to use to collect data around the implementation, and who's going to be making decisions about the program so that, if we need to refine things or change things, we know who those people are who are going to be making those kinds of decisions. And then we really get into the action parts of this particular timeline. What are the resources needed, and how do we gather those, secure those? Let's actually go out and recruit the practitioners who's going to be doing the work. We have to provide the training. We have to operationalize the data infrastructure. We have to actually deliver the program. Teachers have to actually be holding the small group literacy instruction sessions in their classroom. We have to continue to observe the classroom and provide coaching or training around that practice. And then we're constantly gathering data to monitor their progress. And that's basically the implementation checklist from NERN in a one-pager. And I use this in my own practice, and I sort of keep track internally of these things that are being done, whether they're completed, they're in progress, whether something's not started at all, so that I can continuously monitor whether or not things are being implemented in a way that I know is evidence-based as determined by NERN, but also just in my practice. I know when all of these things are green, we're in a really, really good place with the program. Okay, so this third issue that I wanted to address is just around underestimating what it takes to change behavior. Changing, I know that everybody that's on this call has done something, whether it's tried a new diet or gone to the gym, things that are definitely, in my opinion, not as complex as what we ask teachers to do in schools with kids often. And that can be very difficult to establish, a habit or a behavior just around these things like, eating more healthy or getting up at 5 a.m. and going to the gym every day. It's difficult to change behavior. And I think we often make it seem simpler than what it is, especially when we have, adopted some type of program. Again, I'm going to go back to the getting teachers to teach in, small, literacy circles. And they've taught a certain way for most of their life. And now we're asking them to do something different. And it's not only different, it can be more complex. It can ask them to do things that they haven't really done before. And it may not be clearly, it may not be clear to them about what it is they're supposed to do or how this is going to be more beneficial. So there's a lot of, there should be more opportunity there to practice things and to build engagement in the behavior that you're trying to get before you move on. But oftentimes programs are pressing on with just limited engagement. I feel like sometimes teachers are just hanging on, but it's not really at a level that we need in order to get the kind of changes that we expect from them. And so what do I mean by that? It's well, this is how it comes out whenever I'm evaluating things. When especially teachers, because again, that's the frontline staff that I primarily, my job primarily focuses on the interactions between teachers and students. And whenever I hold focus groups or interviews of teachers around programs, these are the four kind of categories that often come out that I sort of categorize as being completely disengaged. They're indifferent. they're just like, oh, this too shall pass. Like like I'll go back to doing things the way that I used to at some point. They really, they're not sold on it. They're not sold on it, but they're really not an advocate of the program. Some people feel ignored, and that in itself can lead to issues because they don't feel like they're being listened to. There's some confusion. That's another category of people. They're confused as to, again, a lot of it around the communication. Why are we using this program? What are the outcomes of this program? Just not really certain about, why things are being done the way they're done. And then, of course, there's anger. I've had plenty of interviews and focus groups where there's real tangible anger in the room, where teachers feel like what they're being asked to do is harmful. They feel like, I already do things in a way that has a positive impact on children, and you're asking me to do something different, and I know I'm not as good at it. That's a hard place to be whenever you're very competent at something and somebody's asking you to do something differently. And so it can lead to anger fairly quickly. And I feel like this is how disengagement emerges in my world. It emerges in these four ways. So how do we turn it around? How do we get engagement from these people and not disengagement? There's a few ways, but let me start off by focusing on these 4 levels of engagement, because while each one of them are important, only the latter 2, the collaborative engagement and empowerment engagement, I feel like these are the 2 that are really necessary when it comes to getting teachers to change their behaviors in ways that we're asking them to in programs. Because programs, they spend millions of dollars on, FTEs, on curriculum, on materials, on technology, but very few programs actually spend any money on how we engage teachers in the process of this program, in building the program, in sustaining the program, in collecting data around the program. That's very often not a part of it. So that first level of engagement is really just informational. And I mean, we do this whenever we create fact sheets on the program, we do open houses, we do reports, we send out emails about it. Again, that's important. People need to know about the program, but that's never enough to get any kind of behavior change. If all you're doing is sending out information about the program and reporting on it, and you're not actually engaging the frontline staff in the process of the work, then again, I feel like this is a reason that programs fail. There's another level, sort of the consultation level of a program, and this is where we're trying to listen to them. We are trying to not make them feel ignored. Again, we're holding community forums, we're conducting surveys, we have public meetings, we're gathering input from them. Again, that is an important level of engagement that we want from people. It's much higher than the informational level, but it's not actually directly utilizing their skills and knowledge to build out the program. And so it's very limited in what it's going to do. And this is often where I find most programs live, and they don't go any further than this. They might provide some information to people, and they might consult with the frontline staff, but rarely do they move beyond those 2 things. So what is collaboration? Again, so an example of that is actually using the frontline staff. So actually using teachers in this case to collaborate with them around what kind of data should we collect in an observational visit in a classroom? How do we collaborate with them in order to build out that observational tool? Versus, building that in isolation of them and then walking into their classroom, and saying, we're here to collect data on your literacy practices. That is a fairly common way that things are done, they're not done, they're done in isolation of the teachers. And then sort of the data collection might be done to them, versus like working with them to build out these things. And the more that we're building the trust with the frontline staff, then the better, the greater engagement we're going to have. And the more people, the more likely it is that we're going to accomplish our outcomes. And then of course there's empowerment, which is a challenging thing. It's challenging to get at that level of engagement and commitment from people. But this is where you give teachers, in my example, or frontline staff, you are giving them voting rights. You're allowing them to make recommendations of the things that should be implemented, the things that should be changed in a program. You're actually empowering them to make some of the decisions. The more that you can get at that level of things, the more likely, again, it is, in my opinion, that your program's going to survive beyond sort of a set timeline. Because people who feel empowered, they have a certain level of investment and commitment to a program, and much more likely to do the things that you're asking them to do. I go back to that example again of my, my 7th grade algebra teacher. He's not empowering anybody, to be a part of the process. He's showing you what you need to know, and you're supposed to follow it. That'll get you so far. That'll get you a little ways. But like empowering people to take ownership in the process and be able to do it independently, of course, that's going to get your program, much further along and probably accomplishing the outcomes that you've set out to do. So all of my evaluations basically have what I call an engagement plan around them. And so I go through and I think about, who it is that we're asking to change in any way in the evaluation. And how do I get to these far to right boxes with these people? So I've given you the example there of I have a grant that's asking teachers to change something. It's asking them to change a practice. So how do I collaborate with them to co-design a classroom observation tool? Because I know that's going to support, the goals and objectives of my program more. It's going to be more authentic if they're involved in it. And it's going to be more likely that my program, survives and accomplishes its outcomes. And so everybody I'm asking to change, I think about in all the equity work that we're involved in San Diego County Office of Education in our schools. A lot of the who for us are our students. And so we are directly involved with student groups. And we try to get to the level of collaboration and empowerment with them. And that's worked out very well. And I feel like it's in sort of the climate where there can be a lot of people who are critical of some of the equity work that goes on. When you have children who feel empowered by it and they are showcasing that empowerment through videos and through different ways where we're showing their voices, it can certainly be can complement all the negative pieces that we see and read about. So that's one of the major ways that I try to address the disengagement that people have, is I try to map out again who it is that I'm asking to change and how they can have a greater level of commitment to the program through collaboration and empowerment. So just to summarize a few pieces here, number one, that most successful programs are using a variety of communication tools and skills to really maintain strong relationships between all parties in the organization. That part is key to the success of programs. I've never really had an issue with a program dying out when all of the communication pieces are in place. I have a great example of some of the grants that I have going on with military connected students. I've been connected to those two school districts for 12 years. Every year that I've been at the county, those grants have continued every year, even with multiple changes in leadership in the school district. They've never changed because the communication around those grants are so effective. The second piece, the second sort of learning here is just like understanding the knowledge gap between interventions and known work and the delivery of those activities to participants. Because, I mean, it's one thing to know that, well, we have a gap over here and we know that this strategy is going to fill that gap. That's one piece of the puzzle. But then how that strategy is delivered to people, that's another gap that often exists. That implementation is really important, as a really important aspect of that. And again, using sort of that checklist, I've found that it's been super helpful in keeping everybody on track of basically what the way a program needs to be implemented in order to succeed. And then finally, like this piece around behavior change. You know, just recognizing how complex it is to change habits, and that, you know, these things require a lot of preparation on the part of program developers and with the support of evaluators, how you have to consistently act on these things and you have to maintain them in order for them to take hold. We know that behaviors don't just change again when you demonstrate that change to people, but it's just the ongoing showing the ongoing demonstration and the ongoing sort of purpose building for these things, and then just continuing to maintain those things through coaching and the use of data in order for the behavior to take hold. And again, something that's not built into that we all know that's really important is like behaviors they just don't change overnight. You know, they take a considerable amount of time. And so this is going to be a lengthy commitment depending on how complex the behavior is that you're trying to change. So those are the big pieces. So I hope, you know, my hope here today is really that, you know, you can take away some of these learnings, you can take away some of these tools that can help you. Again, this obviously it's not a presentation about, you know, evaluation methodology or anything of that nature. It's really around the conditions that I feel need to be a part of an evaluation in order for a program to succeed. And like any evaluator, I mean, I feel like evaluators are optimistic people that these programs are going to close gaps, you know, in schools, that they're going to make a difference for children. We all are optimistic people about those things. And so we have to do a lot of work. We have to support a lot of the program side in order to ensure that those programs succeed. It's not just by carrying out like a methodologically rich evaluation, but it's about attending to these conditions that need to be there as well. So thank you again. I want to thank Corey and CERA for having me, and hopefully some of this information will just make the programs that you're involved in better.
Thank you again, Shannon. We really appreciate the information. So timely. I've had a couple of texts come through to me as you're doing this that just said this is so timely with what I'm doing and the work that I'm doing right now, and we can use these tools. So the discussion and the information was fantastic. This is the first one of these we've done. We appreciate Nikki and all of the work that she has done to get this together. Seriously, you have no idea. And we want, if it was a lot of work, so if we think it's a good idea, we want to continue. And if so, we really want to hear what you have to say about it and where we should focus. Again, thank you, Shannon. Thank you, everyone, for participating. We really are interested in doing more. We look forward to your future participation in these, as well as at CERA, which will be happening in November, again in November at Disneyland. We have some great presentations as of right now. We have Dr. Howard, who is going to be the president of AERA, scheduled to come out and speak to us. He's a professor from UCLA, amazing presenter. We saw him down at AERA in San Diego, and he's going to come and present to us and talk about some of his research, which is going to be amazing. We really want to be there. We have some other things that are coming too, but we'll leave those for surprises that'll be coming out soon. The call for presenters went out. Please present, please submit. We'd love to be able to see some of the work you're doing. And beyond that, have a great day. Again, thank you, Shannon. I'll give you a little applause. Thank you very much. We appreciate it. And we'll see you guys later.